only. But I want to thank everyone for coming this evening. We feel very honored to have Enrique Martínez Celaya here to discuss his new book with author Mary Reiko, and it's going to be moderated by Howard and Fox. So quite an august body of people standing here in front of me. This is Arcana Books on the Arts. I see some few faces here I don't recognize this evening, so I'm really happy that you came. I see some old friends, people I haven't seen in a little while, and that's really wonderful. So we're happy to have you here. We have an emailing list on our front counter because we do have events like this, a couple each month, and if you'd like to be informed about them from us rather than, I think a lot of you probably came because of LA Louver or Enrique's mailing list, you can know about the other events that we have here. I won't say too much more else about that, but there are refreshments before and afterwards. We, of course, have copies of Enrique's new book, Working Method, which he's kind enough to sign. So you can purchase those at the front counter. And we have a few of his other books published by his Whale and Stars Press that are also available. So I think that's it for commerce. So now I'm going to make introductions. Our moderator, Howard N. Fox, is Curator Emeritus of Contemporary Art at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and was previously Curator at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden in Washington, D.C. He has curated and organized numerous solo and group exhibitions, including Made in California, Art, Image, and Identity, 1990 to 2000, Phantom Sightings, Art After the Chicago, sorry, it says Chicago here, but sorry, I should have changed that to know that it was Chicano movement. And the first major Robert Longo retrospective at the County Museum of Art, which I remember fondly. Focusing on issues of content and meaning in contemporary art, he writes and lectures widely. So thank you for being here. Mary Reiko is a novelist and writing teacher who holds advanced degrees in theology from Harvard University and Boston College. Her debut novel, The Memory Room, published by Counterpoint Press, was shortlisted for the PEN Awards in Fiction, among other awards. She's a recipient of a Foundation Literary Lannan Fellowship and is co-author of Martínez Celaya, Working Methods, Métodos de Trabajo, and I apologize for butchering that. And Enrique Martínez Celaya is an internationally renowned artist who works in a broad range of media. He also writes about art, poetry, and aesthetics, and is the founder of the publishing house Whale and Star. His current project, entitled The Pearl, just opened at Site Santa Fe in New Mexico on July 13th, and will be on view through October 13th, so that gives you plenty of time to go and visit it. Enrique is represented by LA Louver, and several of his works are currently on view in the gallery showroom. And the last thing I would like to say is we were very thankful to our friends at LA Louver, Peter Gold, Elizabeth East, and everybody else, Christina, for making this all possible this evening. So without further ado, Howard, would you like to take over? And thank you all for coming.
We're going to stand up so you can see us and we can see you. You're welcome. Enrique, congratulations on the publication of the book, which we're here to celebrate tonight. It coincides with an exhibition that opened just last week at Site Santa Fe, one of the premier venues for contemporary art in this country. And what I thought we would do for the next half hour or so is talk a bit about Enrique's art. I presume that because you're here tonight, you probably already know something about Enrique's art. So we're not going to spend a lot of time talking about the art proper, but we're then going to segue into a discussion of some of the themes that come up in the excellent writing that that is the text of the volume that we're here to celebrate its launching tonight. And then we'll talk a little about the relationship between writing and visual art for our main subject of interest tonight, Enrique Martínez Celaya. Then we'll talk a little about the genesis of this book, and then you'll all get a chance to meet directly one-on-one with Enrique as he signs the books that you will be acquiring. And I've read the entire book. It's beautifully designed, it's very well written, very insightful, very thought-provocative, and I've known Enrique for about 22 years. I've even team taught with him at Pomona College, but I learned a lot from reading this book about his art. So I recommend it. Now, one more slightly lengthy preamble, and then we're going to dive into tonight's discussion. Enrique has asked that I read a slightly lengthy biography. I'll at least read the first paragraph because it will give you an overview into the complexity, the range, and the diversity of Enrique's interests. Before I can put it on, before I can read it, I've got to... Oh, hello. Enrique Martínez Celaya, trained as an artist and a physicist, works in painting, sculpture, photography, and writing. His projects frequently take the form of multidisciplinary environments that balance images with the immediacy of the material experience. His sources, including Nordic poetry, samurai mores, quantum physics, and emotional mechanisms of kitsch, analytic and continental philosophy, Latin American literature, and everyday life. And I can vouch for the veracity of that litany. His work has been widely exhibited internationally and is included in the permanent collections of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the State Hermitage Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles, the Moderne Musik in Germany, and among others, including, I might add, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, where, if my memory serves me correctly, I was the first curator anywhere to acquire Enrique Martínez Celaya for a public collection. I'll wear it as a feather in my cap. Martínez Celaya is a Montgomery Fellow at Dartmouth College, was honored as the second presidential professor in the history of the University of Nebraska, taught as a tenured professor in the faculty of Pomona College and Claremont Graduate University, and as a trustee of the Anderson Ranch Arts Center and served on the Creative Council of Caneco. He has received the National Artist Award from the Anderson Ranch for the Arts, the Anderson Ranch Arts Center, the California Community Foundation Fellowship, a very prestigious one at that, J. Paul Getty Trust Fund for Visual Arts, and the Young Talent Award from the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. In 2013, Editions Biography published and renamed the book that we're here to talk about tonight. There's lots more to talk about, and I'm sure we will touch upon it as we have our discussion tonight. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, you had a major exhibition open just last week in Santa Fe. Why don't you talk to us a little about the scope and the depth, the range and depth of that exhibition, what it includes, how you organized it, and just briefly, and then Mary has actually gotten to see that show, so we're going to ask Mary to talk about the show itself.
Thank you, Howard. So last week opened at Sci Santa Fe a show called The Pearl, which took over the entire space, about 17,000 square feet. It was the mapping of the idea of home as a home will remember itself. I worked on it for about 2 years, and it's very difficult to describe in words. Essentially, as you move through the exhibition, which I call an environment, your sense of what each room or each encounter you have will rotate and change as you move through the other rooms. And partly is because I'm trying to do with space what usually you do with time, like in music or movies, whereas you move through time, things begin to unfold. There's a lot more to say about it, but I think I leave it there for now.
What time span does the exhibition cover?
Well, it's all new work. It's all new work. It was a crafted especially for Sci. They invited me to do something. And originally they wanted to do something like a retrospective, a big survey of work, and I thought that was just not very interesting. So I wanted to do something for them. I looked at the space and the scale of it, and I had in my mind for a long time to wanted to do an exhibition in which things continuously rotate in some manner. And I wanted to work about the idea of home in a way that I can put some of these ideas behind me by taking them on very directly. Things that have been around in my work for a long time, but that in some manner needed to be taken on in a more frontal way. So that's what I created. This is more autobiographical than the rest of my work have been, or at least more outright autobiographical. The other things I've been more concealed about.
And what typifies the autobiographical biographical quotient. What I know that it's been a while since we've seen each other, but I know that you have 4 children. I think that's right.
Yeah. Well,
No more?
No more. Just see how tired I am. It really was about my childhood primarily, but it's really to say it was about my childhood is to distort it. It was a point of departure in which to touch on ideas that I have been interested in for a long, long time, things that are insisting around my head, so I took those things on. Some of those aspects of my childhood are aspects that were difficult, or were hunting, or things that had an accumulation of regrets and many things like that. So that's what I decided to take on. So it's not really about my present life, and it's ultimately not really about me. Although by investing myself in it, by putting myself in a hole, in a position of risk, in a deficit of sorts, I could be unstable enough to make sure that I was working on a certain degree of authenticity. And then from that hole, try to crawl out. But ultimately, if you went to the exhibition, it ought not to matter so much that it had to do with my own childhood, the seed of it.
Well, now, Mary, you've actually seen the exhibition, and you're an art writer. And tell us your impressions.
All right. First, I'm
Maybe
not
have
an
some
art
flavor.
writer, but this is a singular attempt, and I think that
Well, I'll
it's...
say this, you're a very gifted writer about art.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think it's good to write about something that you are not an expert in. By any means, you know you're not an expert, and you're at a disadvantage from the beginning. And if you're a creative person, I think we all are creative in some way, it's good to occasionally be put or to accept an invitation where you are really not equipped. And it has to be the right kind of not equipped, but where you're really not equipped, and then you grow as a person. And so, and this is true of one of the things that I love about Enrique's work, which is it always has an ambition that is greater than what can be achieved. And I feel that in the work, and I think that that kind of courage and that kind of engagement from a point of deficit is inherent in any work of art that I find great, whether it's music or what. So I think that that's important. I just saw experienced the Pearl last Thursday night, and so for me it will probably take several years to understand it, but I can... That's another thing I like about this work. That's another reason I like this artist, because it's not that you get a flash experience that then fits into all of your conventional thinking anyway by the time you drive home. It's more that you think, this is very important in Enrique's work, from my experience as a viewer. You see things that are very familiar. For example, the most risky thing, a hummingbird. He's had hummingbirds, in his work for a long time. And we know we have hummingbird magnets on refrigerators. That's just the most conventional kitsch souvenir shop kind of item, right? But then you can see the hummingbird, you see something ordinary and you feel something that is not at all ordinary, and it takes you 10 years to figure out what you're feeling. And that's exactly why I look at art myself. So 6 days after seeing The Pearl, I'm not very articulate about it, but there's one thing that I could share, which is that I've seen several shows which are one-man shows, the one at LA Louvre last year, the big retrospective in Orange County several years ago. And this one, you are guided through so it's not that it's a one-man show for the first time, but for me, I think it's the first time I'm directed how to see the work. And so at first, I didn't like that idea, because I like visual art as opposed to, say, literature. Well, I don't read books beginning to end either, but I mean, I don't like being told that I go through a certain sequence. But the cool thing about that is two things: that it's kind of, it is a throwing you into the position that we all experience in terms of our own childhood or our own being born. We are thrown into a set of givens that we did not choose. So you have that. And then as you go through, you see a rotation of certain ideas or themes, or I don't like that word, but ideas or preoccupations. And so you already are above this linear circle. So it's great because, I mean, you can go through the circle in a certain way, but your mind is not confined to that. So what I wanted to ask Enrique is, it seems to me this is the most deliberate time that you're looking at the intersection of time, when we understand it in a linear way, and memory, which is not linear. And so by asserting this linear exposure, then we experience both that and we experience our mind. We're lying at the hotel afterwards, and of course, you know, our mind bouncing this way, this way, this way, just like memory does, just like everyone's mind is doing right now at this moment, you know. So I think that it's like a poem to time, but it also, to me, is kind of, besides all the specifics that start in your childhood and become something more than your childhood, it seemed that this was maybe new. It's new in many ways, but one way that it seemed new to me as a viewer is that it's the most direct look at the interface between memory and time. And I don't know if that's at all what you're, that's me. I don't know if that's you, you know? So I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah, I mean, let me just say a few things for those of you who haven't seen it. So what guides you through the exhibition, midway through it, is a hose. It's a clear hose that moves along the ceiling, and it's a hose of tears. And you don't realize that it's a hose of tears until you come to the middle part of the exhibition and you see what it does. And then in the other half, those tears are brought back to the initial source through a channel. And there are many things in between. I'm interested in time and memories, but not so much memories in plural, but memory itself, the structure of what it is. Right. How do we deal with the fact that time has this way to distance us from what happened and makes the past irretrievable? You cannot test it again. All my own sense of that past cannot be tested, cannot be verified. And that lack of verification is something that is very haunting to me. And when I think of the past, when I think of my children's past, of my own past, I imagine that in all these rooms there are thousands of myself or thousands of my children waiting for me to come back, waiting for my return. Rather than feeling like I grow up and I take all these people with me, I feel like I leave all these people behind in those rooms. So the question is, what are they doing in those rooms and what are they waiting for? That's sort of the way I look at time. And in many ways, there's a very ghostly sense of what time does. And in some ways, in the Pearl, I was trying to look at that and those things and how we, as human beings, try to come to terms with that. Not with irony, which is the typical way, or with cynicism, which is another technique, but rather authentically. How do you deal with the fact that we move forward in time, or at least we are sort of evolving in some manner, and we leave all these things behind. We recover from leaving ourselves in the past. And this seems to me at times almost obscene that we recover from that.
I have a question relative to memory. I made notes on a couple of your points in the interview in this book, and you talk about, so let me take a second. Well, here it is. In reply to Mary's observation about an ominousness, an ominous quality in your art, you replied, I'm as interested, actually more interested, in memories of what is to come than in memories of what already happened. Can you elaborate on that a little?
I mean, in a certain sense, it seems to me a great deal of the time that one of the aspects, for example, one of the aspects that is so terrifying to me is that if I'm speaking here with this microphone in front of you, nothing unlikely is going to come out of my mouth. And I'm sort of entrapped within myself. And by being entrapped, only so many things can come out of me. different that might come out of the two of you. In so many ways, we have already defined the future by the way we have restricted the possibilities of that future. Sort of the event horizons of the future has sort of shrunken. And I look at that future in many ways as if it was already the past, as if it was already cards that have been laid out, and I am just playing along those cards. So the question of how does one surprise oneself, not in a trivial sense of surprise oneself, but how do you disrupt that memory? You know, as I think back of that exhibition we're talking about, everything drops away. There are maybe 80 pieces in that place. Everything drops away, so that hose circling the exhibition, kind of luminous, the shadows that it casts against the wall. And because now that cycle, that hose, is in many ways sort of what leads forward, what is a signpost for the future as well as a connection to the past. The two things are in some manner interconnected, you know, and so many of the ways.
Only by tears?
Well, I would like to be more generous and say that not only by tears. I mean, I certainly have great laughter, say, with my children, and laughter has and laughter in sort of the broader sense of it has a way to kind of open reality in some manner. But certain cracks of awareness seem to have such strong connection to tears. I don't want to say that they're defined by it or limited by only that type of experience, but it seems to me that in somehow, in some manner, perhaps, you know, sort of a Kierkegaard-like way of looking at the world, in some manner, sort of reality gains a deeper density. You become aware of something beyond the illusion of living in the moment of great sadness. And perhaps it sounds a very melancholy way of looking at the world, but I think in my sense of it, there's a tremendous amount of illusion and delusion in living, which seems to move out of the way at times, and more often than not, those times come with some tears.
When I think about your art, just generally, I see a lot of interest in not just melancholy, but in vulnerability. Often there are children or young people who are presented trying to hug an animal that might be dead, or that might be imperiled, or that might be deadly. It's like a pivot. You never know exactly what's going to happen narratively in the structure, but it's pregnant with possibilities, and in many cases, they're rather dire possibilities. But you never step up and present an actual tragedy. We don't see in your art Hamlet getting killed, but we might see a ghostly presence and a petrified child.
Let me say a couple things. You know, strangely, I'm not interested in anything. I only said this for the first time here, but I've thought about it forever. You know, like if say you walk down Culver City and walk down and encounter a bunch of homeless people sitting down, sleeping in boxes, and they grab your awareness and they make you feel all kinds of complicated feelings. It's not that you're interested in finding homeless people. It's just the condition that brings about some reaction to you in the world. So I wouldn't describe that as an interest. It's just what happens, and you as a human being react to that condition. And everything that I work with changes, and I feel myself a moving target. And I have no themes, I have no interest, I have no topics. It seems like I do, partly because I can escape some ruts, some preoccupations, but I don't have interest in that sense. These images of, say, children that you referred to has been appearing in the work for the last, say, decade. It's because those children seem to be symptomatic pointing to, signifying something in that, particularly in the context of the landscape. But there's something unfinished there, something incomplete, and it's that incompleteness, that discontinuity of time, that rupture of what cannot be understood, that preoccupies me. You know, tragedy, sort of in a Shakespearean way, somehow those seems as incomplete to me. The basis of my work, I suppose, is those things which I don't understand. So I'm always working in a position of weakness. The things I take on are the things that don't make sense to me, the things that I have no expertise on. So my approach to art making is not one of having something to teach or telling you how much I know about semiotics or whatever it may be. It's just an awareness of the things that I don't understand and try to come to terms with a world that, for the most part, is difficult to grab.
Before we move on to the book proper, and I have specific questions for you, Mary, let me just say that it occurred to me as I read the book and the wonderful essays and what presents itself as a chronological portrait, which I thought was going to be like a timeline, actually turned out to be a deeply sensitive and probing exploration of Enrique's art by Mary. But in the introduction, I'm going to read a quote to you, and then I'm going to ask you both to comment on it. Because you said a few minutes ago in your opening remarks that you saw the show last week, but you didn't know that you could understand it until 10 years from now. And you just said that you are most preoccupied with what you don't understand in and about your art. And even for you, the understanding of what your art might be about is a puzzling topic. Throughout this hefty catalog, this very beautifully designed hefty catalog, the theme of comprehension and incomprehension presents itself again and again. In his introduction, Matthew Biro writes, Martínez Celaya portrays mountains, forests, animals, and male and female figures. These works, and I think he means these images, are significant, filled with otherworldly associations, yet also curiously unreadable. Allegories that seem to break down or even satirize our need for higher meaning. When you did your presentation last year at LA Louvre, and I was in the audience, issues of, well, what does your art mean, Enrique, came up again and again. So, in the context of this book and our discussion tonight, can you, I believe you genuinely engage a sense of mysteriousness in life. And maybe you can't explain it, but how do you respond to this supporter of yours saying that your work maybe satirizes our desire for higher knowledge?
Well, let me try to be succinct about something that really requires a lot more time than we have. So there's Maurice Maeterlinck has a book called The Great Secret, and comes to the conclusion towards the end of the book, which is a beautiful writing if you ever want to read it. It says, the great secret is that all things are secret. And I think that's fundamentally the way things are. It doesn't mean that you're ignorant. I mean, I read as much as I can, and I read and I understand and try to understand some things to figure out what I can understand through cognition, through all these other mechanisms. Then I don't need to make artwork about it. Why would I need to? It would be much more efficient. Like, say, for example, if I was a laser scientist, why would I want to make art about lasers? I can do physics with it. And it's much more efficient, faster, better. But there are certain aspects of living, of life, or of the way things are that seem to create certain gaps of awareness. And those are the areas that, by working on those areas, I feel that I can remain authentic to myself in my exploration as an artist. Because in there, I feel that I can never be an expert. You know, one of the problems, I think, for artists in general is the expertise on themselves. You know, you start with something very fresh, something you have a lot of questions, a lot of doubts, and very quickly you become an expert, and the world says you're an expert, and the work dies in some manner. So what I'm trying to do is remain an amateur in that manner. And the best way to remain an amateur is to confront things that they're always out of reach. And thereby making the whole thing meaningful again. So maybe that's a way to describe it.
Thank you. Barry, your background, you trained as a theologian, and now you are a novelist. In your preamble to your own chronological portrait of Enrique, you talked about belief, disbelief, fiction writing, art writing. Tell us a little bit about your background and how you became an author of this particular, a co-author of this particular book, and also tell us very briefly about the genesis of the book.
I can say two important things, I guess, about my background. I left theology as a professional affiliation. I did get a doctorate. I liked the work I did on my dissertation. I looked to women that were not receiving any attention in my field and so on. And tried to look at how they look at the world and how they use language, theological and non-theological language. But I left that as a field because I felt uncomfortable with language, that I felt uncomfortable with that language because of things that had gone on in my life that involved great suffering. And I felt a crisis of faith and a crisis of language. So going back to what we're talking about earlier, does Enrique have themes or subjects? He does the male figure in sculpture and painting. He does the hummingbird. But I think it's a really important thing in my experience of his work, that it isn't that he has themes or topics or something like that. He has recurring images, but in each work, there's something new that is being felt and I feel looking at it. So what I think is important in all of this stuff, whether you're a physicist or a mathematician or a novelist or a mom, is, where do you choose to locate your attention? And what I like about Enrique's work, because I had never seen any contemporary art till I saw his. I just looked at medieval art and stuff like that, and then someone said, "You've got to go to this opening," and this was the Coming Home show. And I saw this boy and the deer sculpture through all the people in glasses and white wine and all that. I could see it. And I just went back every day till it was bought by the collector in Berlin, I think in Germany, and it was crated up and left. But I went every day because I was feeling something very akin to what theology was for me before I left it. So I think what's important here is that where do you locate yourself? And it's not that you're trying to be mysterious or anything like that. It's you locate yourself on the edge of what you know and what you don't know. And that's true of every scientist. It's true of the mathematicians who I know very well now. It's true of Enrique, I think it's true of me, it's true of the writers that I know in the audience and things like that. And it's true of parenting. I mean, you are in this position of never being an expert. You sort of understand because your child is 4. You have no equipment for when the child turns 5. You've never had a 5-year-old before. So it's this combination of deep attentiveness, if you love your children, and complete lack of expertise. And it's a really great and rigorous and tiring and demanding and rewarding curriculum for anyone doing creative work in any field. I think it's really overlooked as a discipline like that. So I kind of forget some of those questions you asked, but I think that's the really important thing about my love of Enrique's work is this, I feel this vibration, that place where it vibrates, where you're on the edge of what is known and what is not known. And I think that's why he could do work for St. John the Divine. I mean, what kind of work are you going to put in a cathedral? You know, I mean, how are you going to compete with the seriousness of the woman who comes in who just lost a child and is praying and lighting candles? I mean, how are you going to compete with that authenticity? You know? So I think the reason that he could do that, first of all, is putting himself at a disadvantage because of the venue. Like, how are you going to compete with that? You know, in terms of why we're really here and what it means to be human and all that stuff. So that's already starting at a deficit. And then, you know, having your work come also from that place of sort of fear and trembling, you know? Because if we don't come from that place, we're just making more objects to hang on walls. I mean, you know, more books that nobody needs to read. So I think that what's important in my understanding of his work is that courage, which I think we all experience at different times in our lives, regardless of what we do, painting or raising a child or taking care of an elderly person or a sick person or just life. And I think that, so when we look at what are his subjects, it doesn't really matter what his subjects are. It doesn't even matter if he stays in art. He probably won't. I mean, that's my prediction. Because, you know, his art is not about art, you know?
I wanted to say something else that sometimes in these talks, and in almost any moment that I feel like I'm having an exhibition or whatever, there's an assumption that the beginning, where we start up, is a sort of a flat field to start up with. But it isn't. I mean, we live in a cynical condition in the beginning of the 21st century. It has been so maybe for 120 years or so. We live at the decadent end of the modern project with all the consequences of that sort of philosophical movement as it has penetrated into society. We live in very specific conditions where the making of art takes on, either by reacting against or by being part of that situation. There's no way around it. And those are pre-existing conditions to the making of artwork. They're almost never discussed. If you get 10 artists here, we will all talk about what we do as we just like different kinds of Baskin-Robbins ice cream. I like vanilla, and this person like whatever, Rocky Mountain, whatever it's called. And that's what and then we say why we like that ice cream. But that is not the way the basic condition of making art is right now. I think that you take a position in a very subtle way, beyond themes, beyond concepts, towards that cynicism, towards that irony. You believe or don't believe the need for authenticity. You believe authenticity is a 19th century concept, or you believe it is actually something viable and maybe the antidote to cynicism. And those things are more telling of the work of artists than anything else that can be said about it. So, of course, we are educated in a certain manner, and I will stop this little tirade in 30 seconds by going to a lot of exhibitions which are thematically bound because they're easy to do, whatever those thematically bound exhibitions are and museums and so on, because nobody wants to do an exhibition that is called Cynicism and its Antithesis, how you wedge yourself into authenticity. Imagine what that looked like. So nobody wants to do that exhibition, but that's really what's at stake, in my opinion. And as an artist, what you are struggling with, whether you are making rectangles of color or whether you are making bronze figures or whatever it is that you're doing, if it's going to have any currency in an intellectual, transformative way, it's going to have to be in that arena of battle. You may fail, but it is going to have to be there.
Bravo. Yeah.
My final question before inviting your comments and questions. Enrique, you have mentioned in the catalog that most of your painting and sculpture begins with the process of writing. And I wonder if you can comment on the relationship of writing as an activity to your visual art making, and also talk about your work as a publisher of Whale and Star Press, and how publishing relates to your art making. And then we'll have questions and comments from our friends.
And the process of writing is a process of beginning to come to terms with certain concerns. The writing, for the most part, is fairly abstract. It's a bunch of annotations, and it begins to articulate or try to give form or even search through myself, through what is it that I'm interested in. It functions in the same way that for other artists, sketches function for them. I seldom do any sketches or studies for exhibitions, although I did a lot for the site exhibition, because I had to. So in the last maybe 15 years, I've come to understand my work much more related to the literary tradition in some odd way than the visual arts. When people ask me, what are your influences, and I answer some writers, people are always dissatisfied with that answer. They want me to say, like, well, there are some artists like Manet and Velázquez, if we think about, of course, but for the most part, the mechanisms and the insistence of it comes from writers. And when I think of writers from the last 60 years and what kind of battlefield they have been involved in, I find it a lot more interesting than I find the battlefield of the visual artist. Not that there are not tremendous things that have happened in the visual arts in the last 60 years, but I think writers, for the most part, have had still to contend and respond to the world. It has been harder for them to go into, some of them have done quite a good job, but to go into a satellite, into a little bubble of art, disregarding the human condition and its problems and politics and oppression and so on. But writers have had a harder time escaping to that bubble. And for that reason, I think their work remains to me more vital. So I wanted to create a small publishing house that could publish. I mean, this is, by using the word publish, I give it too much credit because it's really a tiny, insignificant thing. We do 2 or 3 titles a year. They're poets or sometimes art criticism that I feel that it ought to exist in the world. Sometimes are translations, for example, 2 recent translations from Russian that I felt that needed to be updated in some manner. So that's what I do, and you know, is like most publishers are, it's not really a money-making enterprise, but it makes me feel like, you know, as the work gets more expensive and less people can have it, there's something very nice about doing something that people can have for $9.99 or $15, and you feel like somehow you can make that special. So, in some way, and it's given me tremendous satisfaction, and especially giving tremendous satisfaction as people are saying that the print is dying and that everything's moving to Kindle and all that. So I enjoy it even more to produce these little books. So anyway, that's it.
Well, we've heard our 2 guests this evening talk about a range of topics ranging from art making to physics to mathematics and to theological concerns like the existence of God. Lately, I happen to have been reading several books on Albert Einstein's theories, other books on physics and cosmology. And the one thing that all of what you've had to say and what I've been reading lately and what I see in your art is that in the end, even the most exacting of sciences, physics, and you are a physicist, and theology, and you are or were a theologian, they all reach the final and ultimate sense of mystery and inexplicability. And that's a pretty meaty subject to be dealing with. And you both have, you in your writing, you in your art. We have questions from you guys now. Yes, saw your hand first.
Yes. Could you speak about poetry in relation to this, what feels to me like a sort of threshold experience that you have with your art as an entry point to this mystery?
Sure, there's a lot to say about it. You know, well, I love poets. No, poets in general, but a lot of people who I love happen to be poets. So I mean, I think that the groping or grabbing of something that is ungraspable through language, in the way poetry does it, and fails at it at times. Especially beautiful when it fails, and you can see the thing that they're trying to hold and how he misses that, and it's so beautiful to see, and the futility at times is so tender. So yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that you know, there's much to say about it, and you know, there are some poets that it's very interesting, like for example, Harry Martinson, the Swedish poet. So Martinson will do also little tiny drawings of nature, so like dandelion or something, and there's something very powerful about seeing this poet in full command. I mean, like Martinson does of language, and then in less command of drawing, and put it next to each other. And something that happens in between, they vibrate between the two of them, is really a very meaningful thing to do. And you know, poetry suffers from many of the same problems that the visual arts suffer, and anybody in the arts. You know, there's posing and there is games and all that stuff that comes with it. But a great poet and a great poem seems to part all that aside and reminds you why is it something other than an introduction card. Yeah.
Enrique, you mentioned that you published some Russian text. Can you tell me more about this Russian text?
Well, so I partnered with a professor at the University of Pennsylvania to bring forth translations, for example, Maldestan, and trying to bring poets to do these translations, working poets, both in Russia and America. So we can bring this text some of the ear, not that I have it because I don't speak Russian, but that they do, some of the rhythm, some of the things that earlier texts that make more wooden, more stiff. So those are some of the things we try to do. So we did that, we did Akhmatova, and we have other things in plans, but you know, those two little texts were wonderful things. The Maldestan had about 40 contributors, different contemporary poets translating these things. And I think it was very well received, and well received also within the poetry community, which is a small community, but one that somehow matters. So those things have been fantastic. Right now we're putting out a Goswami translation. So you know, these are efforts to wedge something in a certain way. You know, as you know, so somebody like Maldestan, who was influential to people like Brodsky and so on, it's interesting to bring him because people are more likely to know Brodsky than they are to know Maldestan. So those are some of the efforts.
Enrique, why your first name is dropped from the cover of your catalog?
Because it's so long, my name, Enrique Martínez Celaya. So I guess they decided that they have some choices to do there. I think you know, a lot of Spanish people have two last names. So Diego Velázquez de Silva, Pablo Picasso Ruiz. But what ends up happening is this is very inconvenient. So, but you know, my mother and father, Martinez is my father and Celaya is my mother. So that seems to me that's what I'm stuck with. So Enrique figured that people will open the first page and see my full name. I don't mind it.
We have time for two more questions, and then you can approach either of our guests individually. Yes. Yeah.
Regarding cynicism and its antithesis in your quote tirade, and regarding the vibration that you felt of the sculpture, which made you go back. I'm talking about vibration here, and the known and unknown. I'm kind of hooking it all together. Where do you place someone's oeuvre like Jim Terrell?
Good question.
Well, you know, let me say something first. These are things that you have thought about a lot. Sometimes is nerve-wracking to answer quickly, because inevitably you will leave things aside that could have been included. And when you are discussing the questions, Peter Sloterdijk has a very beautiful book called A Critique of Cynical Reason, sort of taking Immanuel Kant's sort of things. And he sort of looks at the cynical condition of our modern times. And the specific example that you bring up of James Turrell, does not to me, gives me what I need to get beyond this cynical condition. I do not, there are conditions or ways of thinking that in words, in descriptions, even in philosophical statements, sound a certain way. And yet the way they work through in implementation is completely different. Everything breaks down in the particulars. Not everything. Most things break down in the particulars. And although something can be presented in a way that seems to have all the makings of everything that one needs, sometimes, for some people, their implementations seem to break down those particulars. The details do not hold to the whole, or doesn't allow you to penetrate those claims. And so my own sense is that you can only get to an authentic condition through the human problematics. We are not, the sunset is one thing, sort of Kantian idea of the sublime and so on, but I think that we are human beings. We're just animals with a little bit of awareness of something else. And we have a lot of problems, and our gyrations, emotional gyrations, are relatively small. There's the epic movements of the sky and the stars, and then there's all our twisty things of our lives and our problems and our issues and our smallness and our weaknesses. And I think it is through that you find the other side. It's not around it. So, I'm sort of sometimes concerned when something, people tell me too much about angels dancing in the head of a pin or things like that. I think I need more grit and more of something else.
Good question, good answer. Your hand was up. You'll be the last question tonight. Please speak nice and loud so all the people
You
in the
put me
back.
in a spot because I've actually been contemplating whether this should not be a private question. So I'm going to ask. Now you told me to do it. So you speak a lot about time, and the moment I hear time, a little alarm bell goes off, because that to me spells loss. So I'm going to ask you, what is your great sense of loss?
When everybody finds out that I'm Cuban, they immediately make this story of exile, because it's easy, So they say, well, this narrative of loss is pre-existing, prepackaged. But when I was a little boy, I sort of felt that the world did not make sense. So the sense of loss is the sense of being with a certain separation from what seems to be. That thing in itself, and my own consciousness, watching that thing in itself from a certain distance. And I think all the other losses, there's a lot of personal losses and some personal gains, but in some manner that is structural deficit there, that is structural distance, and trying to close that gap was a fundamental loss to beginning. And when was it lost? It's very difficult to know those kinds of things.
Is that what haunts you?
Yeah, I mean, in very many ways, it haunts me. I mean, if I look at anything long enough, even my cell phone, it will cease to sort of be comprehensible by me. So it's only when I'm superficial and float lightly among things that I feel like I belong to those things, or those things belong to me. The moment I get slightly more intense about it, I realize that there's tremendous disconnect between myself and all that is around me, including myself. So, and that is a sort of a fundamental sense of being lost to oneself. So, you know, how do you look? You know, how do you look for something when it's yourself that is lost? That is.
Enrique, I think the sense of loss that pervades your art is palpable, deeply moving, and don't want to be too cute about it, but your sense of loss is the art world's game. Would you all join me in thanking Enrique Martínez Celaya?